In this video, we're going to add automated testing to our web application. Now, automated testing is tests that run automatically as we develop our web application. And it's a really good idea to do because as we add features to our web application, it is possible that we could break something that was already working. And we usually don't have time to test out all of the pages in our application ourselves. So if we had some automated tests that test out all of our application, we can add features to our application without worrying about breaking things that we know that should already be running. So it is a really good idea to do testing. And to get started with testing in Rails, we'll just add a gem or two that will help us test a little bit more efficiently. So in our gem file, we can scroll down here and we have these different groups right here. Now, if we put something in the development or group right here, it only gets installed in our development environment. This means our local laptop or machine that we're working on, or if we're in Cloud9 developing there, that would be our development environment. Now, these gems are installed but only loaded in our testing environment. So this is only loaded when we're running our tests. And the reason we do this is so that we don't clog up our production machine with gems that aren't being used to run our website. And these gems are only used for testing. So the gems that we add in our development group are Guard and Guard Mini Test. Now, Guard will run our tests automatically in the background. As we save files, it'll run the tests associated with those files. And if we broke something, we'll know right away that something broke, and we can go back and fix it. Now, in the test environment, the mini test reporters, this will allow us to format the output of our test results a little bit nicer, so we can see the important information and not worry about all the extra output that we don't really need to see. And finally, this last gem right here, we won't use right away, but this will help us create models in the database to test with. Now, after we add those gems, we need to save and run bundle. Now, the system test, I just wanted to go to the side. If you're running on Cloud9, you might need to do something if you're going to do the system test. And I'm going to kind of focus on the system test. The system test will actually run our code in a browser. So it'll automate the browser so we can see our full application working as it would in a browser. But if you're in Cloud9, this machine isn't hosted in the cloud somewhere, and it's really hard to install a browser and have it pop up. That just doesn't work. So what we need is a headless browser, or a browser that doesn't display anything, but we can still do that. Unfortunately, Chrome, it has a headless mode that we can use. So to install that, the first thing that we can do is download this, get this package into our package management system. By the way, I'm using Ubuntu instead of the Amazon version of Linux. So when you create a Cloud9 environment, you can use this Ubuntu environment. So we run this command right here. And this just wraps around so it's current. And this will download the package that has Chrome in it. And after we download that, we can sudo apt-get update. And that will realize the package is there. And now the next command that we'll run is to install Chrome. And if you notice, it will give an error the first time. I've already done this so that it might skip over that error. But it needs some more packages installed, so we can install these packages right here. And to get those to install. And now to install everything with all the errors, running this last command. And again, I've already done it. So there are some things this didn't really do anything, but if you do it the first time, then this will fix all of the installation. So that's how we can get a headless browser in Cloud9 that we can use for our testing. Now the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to test our home page and our about page. And there's not much to test here, just to make sure that the page comes up. And I'm going to test to make sure it says welcome and about. So first I'm going to generate a system test to test our home controller. That's the name of the controller that hosts those pages. And it will generate us a test in the system folder. Now that we have that test in here, one thing that we might want to do is go to these controller tests. They created a bunch of tests for us here that won't really work anymore. Now we could test the controllers individually. That might be a good idea, but I'm not going to cover that. So I'm going to take all of these controller tests and I'm just going to delete them. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and we'll set up, here's the test that was created right here, and we could go ahead and uncomment this, and visiting the index, I'm just going to call this the home page right here. So we'll visit the home page and we'll assert that inside of an h1 tag it says welcome. And also that will happen when we visit the root URL. Now next we need to set up our test helper. This is code that will run, it kind of sets up our testing environment right here. So kind of the basic thing, we just need to add in the rest of our gems that we're going to do here. So that MIDI test that's going to format our testing output will require that, the MIDI test reporter, and then this is a progress reporter with some color. And there's more that we can do with this MIDI test, so you can look at the documentation and other examples, and that will format our testing output in different ways. The other thing, we're not going to use fixtures. We can if we want, but I'm going to use that FactoryBot gem to be able to set up stuff in the database. I think it makes our tests a little bit cleaner and easier to understand. Now here in the system test, there are tests that just kind of run without a browser. They test the individual pieces of our application. And again, the system test tests all of our application running in a web browser. So we just need to set this up. And instead of doing this right here, we need our headless browser. And of course, if you're on a desktop or a laptop computer developing directly, you might just want to leave it using the Chrome browser. This right here will make sure that we run in the headless mode if you happen to be on Cloud 9. So now that we have all that set up, we can run our system test by doing the Rails command and then test system. And we see that the one error ran. And by the way, we can run all of our tests by just doing bin Rails test. These system tests that run in a browser are a little bit more processor heavy because we're launching a browser and running it. So we might not want to run them all the time. So that's why they're separated out. But we can see that our one test worked, saying that welcome is on the page. Now, a good thing to do is maybe break our test and make sure that it fails. So maybe if we misspell welcome a little bit, this shouldn't be on the home page. So now we can go run that test. Here we can see that it failed. It couldn't find welcome inside of an H1 tag. So now what we'll do is we'll get our test to run automatically, and that's Guard's job. So to get that working, we'll just do bundle exec guard init, and this will initialize our guard file, which is the instructions for guard to on how guard works. So we'll see the guard file in our root directory right here, and it has some stuff in here. And I'm just going to modify this so it works a little bit better with the current version of Rails. Now, if you're following along, to save you a little bit of typing, a lot of these lines up here I copied from down here. So you might want to check down here and copy and paste that in, because this is a lot of specialized typing. There are a couple extra added in. But basically what this says is when any file, this is a regular expression, when and watch all these files, when any of these files change, run this test over here. So after we've made those changes, we can run bundle exec guard, And now we're in Guard, and Guard will automatically watch our files, and whenever we save them, it'll rerun our tests. So let's test this out by fixing this test that I broke, and we'll just change this back to welcome. Now, I didn't quite catch it on camera, but I did when I saved it. This test automatically ran right here. I didn't do anything to make this run. Now, if you're in Guard and you want to run all your tests, make sure everything is working, just press the Enter key and it will run all of the tests. And if you want to get out of Guard, you just type Exit and Enter and you're out. And of course, you could run them again by running the Guard command. Now that we have that set up, let's test our About page. So a lot of times with testing, you just copy and paste a previous test and just change it to make sure everything's working. Now you can do About URL or About Path. And I'm going to leave this as welcome. Make sure the test is broken to start off with. And you see that 2 tests ran and 1 failed. And if you read the failure, it didn't find, expected to find variable or in an H1 tag welcome, but it didn't found it. It also found About Us, which masked the selector, but it didn't find welcome. So we can resume or type About there. Now, of course, the text says About Us, but we don't want to test all the details of our views. Just finding something there to test to make sure it works is sufficient. If we get too detailed on this, if we change the views too much, then we'll have to go back and change all of our tests. So we really just kind of want to check for a few words or a phrase to make sure that our test is working. And sure enough, automatically our tests ran and they're all working. Now, I did want to also point out one thing. If Guard ever just doesn't work for you, you can always just run your tests manually this way. So you can go back and run it the manual way. Now, one thing I did want to point out with all of this testing going on, it is creating some test databases and storing it in our DB folder. And the reason why it's creating so many, each test case is going to run with a clean database with no data in it. So since this is multi-threaded testing, so we can run more tests at a time, they're going to create a SQLite database for each thread that might be running. Now, if you're using a Postgres or a MySQL database, this probably won't be an issue. Now, if you can tell, my Atom editor here is picking these out as being changed or new files. And we really want Git to ignore these files. So we probably should go to this Git ignore thing right here. And we got these database right here. And we can just add in a line here. And I'm going to put a wildcard there. That way, all of our database files will get ignored. Now, once I've changed that right here, you see that we don't see any of those database files anymore. Git is going to ignore them, so we won't commit them into our repository. Now, the next thing I'll test is the user creating an account and logging in. So we'll need to create a new test file for that. So we can leave Guard running in one terminal window. We probably have another terminal window running our Rails server, and then we can open up a new terminal window and generate a new system test for our users. So we'll just create a user system test, and this will test in creating an account, logging in, and we could test log out as well. Now we have the system test right here in the test systems folder, where the same folder as our home test is. And I'm just going to paste in here the first test, signing up. And these tests should read like a story, exactly what you would have the user do to create an account. So he's going to visit the sign up path, fill in his name with a name, fill in his email, fill in his passwords and the confirmation, click on the sign up button, And later we just want to make sure that our website says account created. And again, I'm not testing our views too much. I'm just testing to make sure that that it says something that it was successful. And another thing that we could test is we can attest that if we have a selector in our navigation, there should be some text that says log out, and that will just show that the user is signed in. We can also refute. So we can refute means this should not be the case, and we shouldn't see a login button or a sign up button. But just a little bit of minimal testing, make sure this person really is logged in. And of course, I'll save this test. And you see that Agard is a little bit smart. The only thing it ran is the that test file that I saved. So it only ran that one test, and it seems to be working. So now that we have the sign up working, let's try maybe if they sign up and there's an error. So maybe they didn't fill out their email or their name or their passwords don't match. So I'm just going to copy this previous test that we have here and then modify it. Sign up doesn't work with errors or something like that. And so now let's say they forget to fill in their email. Instead, we should see something about fix errors somewhere. So hopefully a message will come up, please fix the errors below. And then we also want to make sure that it still says log in, showing that they're that they're still logged out, and that we definitely do not see a log out button because that would mean they're logged in. So now we can run that test, and sure enough, we have one. It didn't find fix errors in here. So if you look here, it kind of tells you the text that's on your page right here. And you can see it says, please fix the errors below. So instead of fix errors, fix the errors. And now we see that that test worked. And so now I added another two tests, one to test to see if the user can log in. And also if the user can't log in with the wrong password. Now I have this line right here. In order to log in a user, the user has to exist in the database. So what I could do is I could say user equals user.new and then set up his name equals whatever. And I could set him up, save him in the database, and then test out my case. But that could be a lot of work, especially if we're going to write a lot of tests. So that's where FactoryBot comes in. FactoryBot will automatically create things in the database so that we can test them. So to get this working, inside of this test folder, the same place where we have our application or our test helper, all we need to do is add a new file, and we're going to call this factories.rb to be able to create a factory. And then I'm going to put in some factory code, and we'll probably create a factory for each model we have in our database, but this is a factory for a user. Now a sequence will just generate a unique name each time. And we also have an email. This is going to create a unique email each time. And this is kind of really important because we're making sure our emails are unique for each user. If we didn't do this, this won't work. So the way this sequence works is the very first user equate will be test 1, and the second will be test 2, test 3, test 4. So then if we just don't care about having a sequence, we can just pass in a block of code here, and this just sets the password to password. And then the confirmation we're setting to the same password as the password we already set. That way they're equal. So this should generate a valid user and save them in the database. So now we'll use this factory bot, and we need to know what the user's email is so that we can log in with that user, and we also need to know the user's password. So we can pass in the stuff that we want to set custom for this test, and then the factory will set all the rest of the fields to whatever it decides. So we don't have to include this unless we really want to know what they are. So after we have the user in the database, we visit the login path, fill in his email and his password. We can click on login, and we make sure that it says logged in somewhere. And then of course now we're checking to make sure that there's a log out and not a login. Now here's another test. Same thing. If the user has an email, we get the user with an email and password. We're going to visit it, but notice I'm going to mess up the password. So we should see somewhere that says invalid, and make sure that they are not logged in so that there's a login button there. And now running this, we see that all of those 4 tests work. And now we can test all 6 tests that we've run. And make sure they're all working, and they are. So now I'm going to do some system tests for our task model. So we'll test seeing tasks, creating tasks, and deleting tasks. So I already generated a system task test. Now to be able to test this, I'm going to do another factory for tasks here. Create a sequence for the name. A due date will be due 1 day, the now, today, plus 1 day. Priority will be 1. And this right here, association user, every task needs to belong to a user. So what this will do is it will create a user and then associate that this task with the user that it creates. So that's how we can do associations with FactoryBot. And we'll save that. So now on our tasks for tasks, we'll just test our index page. We'll create 2 tasks, visit the page, and make sure we see their names on that page. So we'll run those tests, and we'll see as I save those that it didn't find the task name on the page. And if we look at our text here, it says invalid request. If you notice, the user is also not logged in. Well, of course, we never logged in a user, and the tasks we created, they're not even associated with the user that is logged in either. The way that FactoryBot will work actually will create 1 user for this task and another user for that task. And there isn't any user logged in, so these tasks are just tasks associated with new users. So what we need to do is log in a user. So what we can do is we can create a user using FactoryBot. And then we can use that user that we created to associate with this. So now we're saying don't create a new user, use this user right here that I created before. That way they're associated. And now we can start writing some login code, like visit the login path, and then fill in the email and the password and log in. Now we're actually going to be doing that quite a bit. We're going to pretty much all of our tasks and our notes on our tasks, the user has to be logged in, and we'd have to repeat this on every test. So it'd be nice if we could kind of extract the logging in thing and just create a nice quick function that we could call that will log in a user. So to be able to create that inside of this test folder right here, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to put this in, call it support. So this is kind of short for supporting files. And I'm going to create an authentications macro.rb file. Right here, authentication macros. So these are macros are just kind of things that we might do a lot. So we're going to create a new file here. If you notice, that will create this new support folder, and inside of there we have the authentications macros. So putting in some code here. We're using the module authentication macros. Now it's really important that this be the camel case version name of the file name. So make sure you spell everything correctly if it's not working. Make sure you spell your file name correctly and also your module name. And so we'll just create a new function here where called login users. And now the user, when we call this function, we can pass in things about this user. So if we want this user's name or password to be something specific, we can pass those options in, which I'll show you that when we go to call this function. So if there isn't a password in this options right here, then we'll make the password secret and we'll create a user with all the options that were passed in. And we'll go in and log this user in. Now this very last line is important. It's the return of this function. So Ruby by default returns the very last statement. So this will return the user that I created to whoever called me. Now to include that module that I just created, we need to add this line here that requires every file that ends with a .rb in it, or every Ruby file inside of my support. So this means inside of any folder that's a subfolder of the support, it's going to include it there. And then for all of our test cases, we're going to include the authentications macro, which is going to define that function so that we can call it. And then back with our tasks test, we'll call that function right here, and it'll create a new user this way, a new user, log them in, and then we have the user so that we can associate them with our two tasks, visit the task path, and then see those tasks on the page. And we can see after we saved, the test ran and it was successful. Now with the tasks and the users, I wrote the tests after we had developed that functionality in our application. So we're testing after the fact. There is another methodology of development. It's called test-driven development. What that means is we write our tests first and then we develop our application so that the tests will pass. And this is a good method. If you have a client, you can sit down and come up with these test cases, especially these system test cases, and say, this is what I want my website to do. I want someone to be able to log in and see their reminders. So that way we write the test first, and then we're going to make the application so that the application passes those tests. So I'm going to add reminders to my application. I have tasks, and then I'm going to add reminders just so we can see this. And I've already written 2 test cases with reminders. I want people to visit the reminders path and see the reminders, and I want them to be able to create a new reminder. Now running those tests, they're going to fail, obviously, right here. And this is the first test. By the way, the tests run in a random order, so this is the test I wrote on top. And we can see that there is no factory registered called reminder. And in fact, I don't even have a model named reminder. So to fix this test, we see this error. This error is going to guide us in developing our application. So I need to create a model called reminder. So we'll use the generator to generate us this new model. And reminder, it'll have a title, a body of text, and also it will have a user ID column so we can associate this with a user. And we can see that it created us a migration. It also created us a model. And we could see that there is also a file to test our model specifically. So this isn't a system test, this is a model test. And because we added FactoryBot to our gem file in the development group, it created a factory for us, which was the error that we were getting, that there wasn't a factory. So let's go ahead and run that migration. And then let's work on some more testing. So if we look at our factories file, we could see this factory that was created, and we could see it did its best guess on that user ID, but it doesn't know that users are associated with other factories. So I'm going to just move this factory that it created down to the bottom to keep the same order, but that's not really necessary. Now off camera I kind of fixed this up a little bit. We need to pass in this variable here so that we can do a sequence, and also a sequence with a title, and then the body. That was fine. And now instead of the user ID always being 1, we can have that be an association. Now in my models test, in that reminder test that was generated by the generator, I can test my model out a little bit. And you can see here that I am just using the factory bot to build a reminder. Now the difference between build and create is build doesn't save it in the database, and create will save it in the database. And I'm just going to make sure that if we build a reminder that it's valid. And I'm also going to test that if there is no title, that the reminder is invalid. And finally, I'm going to test that it's invalid without a user. So if there's no user, then it will also not be valid. So now that I have all these tests, I'll save it and they'll run automatically in the background. And you'll see that they're complaining that there is no user. That's because I don't have any association with the user in my model file yet. So let's fix that. So back in my app models reminder file right here, we can just add belongs to a user. And saving that, the test should run in the background. And we see that that fixed 2 of our tests. The test that makes sure that there is a user, and also the test that makes sure that the model is valid. But the test without a title, it's expecting the true to be false, is what it's saying. So let's look at that test. It's saying right here that the reminder is valid when it shouldn't be, because there is no title. So let's go back to our reminder model and add that validation. And we'll save that again, and the tests will run in the background. And we see that all 3 of those tests pass. So let's see how we're doing on all of our tests. Press enter and run all the tests again. And now we see that we still have those 2, the system tests that I wrote before are still failing because there is no reminders path. In fact, we don't have a reminders controller. So let's fix that test next. So once again, back in our app, our system test down here under reminders, this is failing because reminders path is not defined. So let's create a controller for that. So we'll again use the generator to generate a controller, reminders, and we'll even have it generate the index action. Okay, so that'll generate us a view and the controller. It'll also generate us some test files that we're not going to use. So up here, you see that it created a new reminder controller, and this will probably fail as soon as I change my routes so that it's a resource. So we'll just delete that file out, and let's see where we stand with our tests. And we see that still reminders path is not valid. So what we need to do is we need to go to our routes file and add in that resource. So we'll delete this default route that the generator generated up top, and we'll add another resource to this reminders. Running our test again, both tests are still failing, but now it expects to find a reminder 1 in our view right here, and we could see that we still have this default view that was generated by the generator that's obviously not going to display any reminders. So let's fix that. Now before getting too far, I decided to add one more test to make sure that users that are logged out cannot see the reminders. So if we just visit the reminders path, we should be redirected to the root page, and see something that says invalid request or something like that. So let's run that test and see what happens. Now we could see that we were not redirected, so that test fails. So let's fix that test. And so we'll just do a before action authenticate to make sure that users are logged in before they visit these pages. So going back to our test, let's see if we fixed it. And sure enough, we could see that that test, the first test is now passed, but we still have to work on these two tests, finding the reminder in there. All right, so at our reminders controller, we're just going to pull out all the reminders for the current user, and then we need to work on the view. So I created a partial off camera here, and that prints out the view. It has the title and the body in there, just like the tasks. And also in our index thing, we set the title and render out the reminders. So by making all those changes, let's look and see what happened to our tests. And yay, it passed. So now we just have to work on this last test, creating a new reminder. So that's this test right here, and it's complaining that there is no new reminder button. So let's go fix that. So now we'll just add a link to a new reminder, have it go to the new reminders path, and we can even style it up by adding in the Bootstrap classes, just like we did with our tasks. And we see here, undefined local variable or method, new reminders path. So that's probably because I misspelled it. It should be new reminder path right here. And if you notice, this broke the index test before. So that's great that the automated test will also help us catch errors when we break other tests. Even though I'm working on the create test, when I break the index test, I see that as well. And running the test again, now the index test is working, but we still couldn't find the new action for the reminders controller. And so now we add in that new action, save again, run our test, and let's see what happened. And now it's saying, oh, you're missing the new view. So now we create a new view with a form to create a reminder. And after creating this, let's rerun our tests. After they ran, it says the create action could not be found for the reminders controller. So let's make that method. So now we have the added the create method that was missing into our code. We also needed to add in this reminder params here, and we'll save that away, and let's see how our tests work. And it passed. So press enter to run all of our tests again, and make sure all of our tests are passing. And they are. So now we have that functionality. Now if you notice, as I created this reminders thing, I didn't look at my browser once. So I did all of this development just by trying to get the test cases to pass. So after you're done, you might want to go look at your browser and make sure that things look the way they are, or the way they're supposed to be. You'll probably need to add some style, but these tests just kind of guided me towards the development. Now what I am missing is something to test the show action, something to test the delete action, and also something to test the update action. So we need to add those three tests in to make this a complete controller. Now the good thing about this is these tests, they're somewhat readable by people that don't even know how to code that much. So you could sit down with a client or a customer, and you can spec out your entire website by creating a bunch of tests. Then all you have to do is, once you have the test created, you show them to your client and say, is this the functionality you want? And you can kind of put that in your contract. And then all you have to do is work on those tests and develop just those tests. Now there are ways that you could get Guard to focus on specific tests. If you have 100 failing tests, it might be hard to find exactly the one you want to work on. But you can focus these tests onto a certain model or class, and then develop your website that way. Now, the most important thing is that you do some tests because, like I said before, you don't have time to check all of your website to make sure it's still functioning the way it was supposed to. As you add functionality, you might have broken other things. But if you have these automated tests, you'll be able to catch those and fix them before you deploy your code to production. Thanks for watching.